why are we so hyper reactive? Why are we so defensive? Why are we so triggered? Many people right now are operating in that survival system chronically. We're not meant to live in that system. We're meant to tap into that system. So when we have the awareness of what system I'm in, and I can learn how to train my system to get back into a safety system, presuming I am not in danger, now I'm taking in very different information. Now I can move very differently here. And with that system, that's where all of these other systems come back online.
What happens when a psychotherapist realizes that talk alone isn't enough? Erin Cutrone began in the world of traditional counseling, but her work took a powerful turn when she awakened to the intelligence of the heart and the healing power of vibration. Now she supports her clients not just through stories, but through frequency, energy alignment, and deep soul remembrance. If you've ever sensed that healing requires more than insight, this conversation will speak to every part of you. Hello, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Hechavarria, and welcome to the Balance and Blissful Energies podcast. And Erin, I'm so pleased to have you on the podcast today.
Hi, thank you.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. So it's funny. Yes, I'm a therapist. I still practice therapy through the state of New York, but I have moved more towards coaching to kind of allow more freedom in this work that we're doing. But I always say it's really interesting that what we know of psychology, most people know it as psyche, as study of the mind, but the etymology of psyche is actually life and breath and soul. So that we've separated this somehow to be just the mind is like actually counterintuitive to what it actually is.
Yes.
So yes, I turned coach. I call myself more nervous system and awareness training. So we tap into like the kind of bringing it into the body specifically, but then it will always inevitably come back to a soul work. So I work with therapists, I train as a clinical supervisor and a mentor towards holistic wellness professionals. And then to share some of this work, we have created the space, which is our virtual sort of pop-up and community style wellness. And we kind of bring people together there. So all of this work, there's many access points to learning with me and us and these providers. So thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm just curious about, you did train originally, right, in psychotherapy. So what was the entry point for energy work for you? Was it something that goes back to your childhood, or was it something that came in later?
Yeah, I think it came in later, definitely. I found psychology and counseling very young. It was intuitive to me. I've done it, I used to make jokes. I was a bartender and it started there. And then I was like, okay, this is not how I want to do this. But I was studying psychology and then I went on to get my master's and, I'm licensed. But I would sit as, and my supervisors would, always encourage me to dress older. And I was, 18, 19, 20 years old in these fields doing work that was making profound impact. And not from study, even to today, like I have to study and keep up with, continuing ed. But so much of my work is I find the less that we know, the more we can access, like before, I go back to, time, we didn't have books. So yes, there was story, but how was information given to us, and whether it be survival, it was intuitive. We can tune into a lot of things. Prehistorically, there was not book, we were not getting podcasts, and it's beautiful that we have this as an outlet, but we are also in, I think, information overload. And, coffee is good for you. Coffee is not good for you. The cold plunge is good for you. Cold plunge is not good for you. And it's like we're overriding our body's natural ability to tune into these things. But getting back to your question, when I was really young doing this work, I would sit in these sessions, and when you're an open vessel listening to somebody, th- words would come out of my mouth, and I was just like, those are, where did that come from? Like, those are not my words. And they'd be like, I totally, yes, you're so right. And I'm like, I am not so right. Like, those were not my words. And so I started to kind of tune into like what was happening in these sessions. And I would, we would do 45 minutes, an hour. And in between, I was like scarfing food. Like I had never been so hungry. My body was just like metabolizing everything so quickly. And so that was the start of it where I was like, what is happening here? But I'm sure you've had very similar experiences where it's like, how do you explain when you know something that is not your brain's knowledge, that something else is coming through?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in medicine, you don't say that you don't know it because,
Right. Right.
you just say it.
Like, this is it. Right.
Right, right. You say it with authority and that's it, right? But I mean, most of the time it's often hard for someone who's done a lot of training to differentiate intuition from pattern recognition from all of the training that you've done. And so I think that the fine tuning comes in being able to tune in with the individual, with the client person across from you, to really get a sense of what is unique about this person and this situation, and why are they, because otherwise you're playing a game of statistics, and we're increasingly realizing that that's not the healthiest way to practice
Mhm.
medicine. Yeah.
Right. And I love that because we override that what is e- obvious if you see or hear, when we get into these like Claire specialties, um, when and I try to teach my team this. So, how do we use intuition on a clinical level, on a wellness level, on a provider level? And then this is what I teach my clients, and where those mechanisms of, the patterns, I love that, how you say that, the trauma, that disconnect from self and knowing, and how do we help them tap into their intuitive knowing without that cut and paste. It's like, yes, okay, right. So I have all of these clinicians, and if you take this and apply it here, and you take this and you apply it here, and that's protocol, but it's not working. Why?
Yeah.
Because we're
Yeah.
overriding, or we're overriding, our body's ability to tune into, okay, I love coffee, but when I have coffee, my anxiety is through the roof, or my panic is through the roof. That's your body communicating with you. So a lot of what I help them, whatever level we're working with, is how do we start to communicate and, like you said, discern the pattern, the autopilot, the default, and, at this time and place, what is your body communicating with you? So I find it very beautiful work. And again, that soul work, this is our essence. We don't need to, it's almost like the unlearning to just tap into our innate wisdom.
Yeah. And I love how you mentioned before we were on recording, that you help people connect with their nervous system and regulate their nervous system, that's a really big part of your work. And I've also come into that realization as well, even as a gastroenterologist, that it's such a huge part of the symptomatology
Mhm.
is related to nervous system dysregulation.
Mhm.
And that's like a common phrase that's used nowadays. It wasn't used so much before. But do you
Right.
want to go into that a little bit? How you work with, how you coach people through that?
Yeah, and I think that's sort of where that just simplifying it to be nervous system awareness and training kind of encompasses a lot of it. And then we, tap into the rewiring, but I use a lot of psycho ed there where we use this is the work of Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory.
Mm-hmm.
But using those still face experiments, I speak a lot to that. And so for the listeners, what that is, Stephen Porges really studies the nervous system, really. It's the safety and danger systems. And so that's really what our nervous system, if we can simplify it as simple as you can be, which is what I've tried to do. When we're looking at, so still face experiments, we use a very neutral expression. And we would manipulate breath to activate parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. So I always say sympathetic being like more of a danger threat system, parasympathetic being our safety system. So if I had you breathe through a straw or that short, shallow breathing, that would activate that stress system. From my very neutral face that has no expression, if you are in your threat or stress systems, you might look at my face and say, oh no, what did I do? Something is wrong. And like go through this Rolodex of the day, the week, the month of what possibly could be wrong. When we take the same body with the same expression on my face, let's say, and I activate your safety system, your parasympathetic system, your rest and digest, we might hear it as. From that very same expression, you might see, she's so interesting. I wonder if she's a vegetarian. Like, what does she do for fun? And I have zero expression on my face, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I start with this as foundation because depending on what nervous system state we're in, we're actually taking in different cues from the very same thing. And I think that is important in the work that we're doing. It's important in the world. Why are we so hyper reactive? Why are we so defensive? Why are we so triggered? Many, many people right now are operating in that survival system chronically. We're not meant to live in that system. We're meant to tap into that system. So when we have the awareness of what system I'm in, and I can learn how to train my system to get back into a safety system, presuming I am not in danger, now I'm taking in very different information. Now I can move very differently here. And with that system, that's where all of these other systems come back online. So, we're talking about having more peace or more unity or more compassion or learning even. None of those systems are online when we're in a threat and danger nervous system. So I think, just beyond health and healing, this is our school systems, definitely our, healthcare systems need this. We can go into every system here that needs kind of this awareness to see, I have a lot of activists and I have a lot of people that are involved in, politics. And I'm like, actually, we need this here too. Like if we're meeting that system with how it's already moving, if we're all moving in defense and we're all moving in survival and we're all moving in fight or flight, that's conscious leadership,
Mm-hmm.
So I think where we can go with this is just profound, if that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I find interesting for this, connection of the nervous system, right? We're talking about the vagus nerve on the one hand being that rest and digest versus, the sympathetic system, which is complicated, ganglion and whatever.
I'm like, how simple can I make it without scaring people off?
So I like to think of it as, when we activate the vagus nerve, it allows us to come into our center where we can connect with a higher level of consciousness because we don't have to be in that adrenaline focused, okay, I'm here in the physical to make sure that I control my environment from any dangerous, right? Like from the saber-toothed tiger that's going to run after me, right? And kill me. That's not where we are. We're in a safe place. And now we can do our intuitive work, our telepathic work, because we're capable of all this. It's just that it's been over so many, who knows how long, like ages, we're finding out that we've been around for a very, very long time, much longer than we originally thought. And so we have certain abilities that have been downregulated, and we're like you, me, and many others are tuning into that through this in part through this nervous system regulation, in part through just also being in the heart space. So let's talk about that.
Hmm. Oh, I love this. So a lot of my work, I go under Anahata Wellness, and the collective is Anahata. And for the listeners that don't know, this is Minnie, and I've had lots of internal battle with this. Do I, scrap this and make it something that, is just more accessible for people? And every time I come back and I'm just like, no, I'm meant to teach people about this. And so Anahata is taken from the Sanskrit, from my yoga studies. So I also have studied yoga. And it's essentially the heart center, the heart chakra. The translation of Anahata is the unwounded heart, or um, I've learned it, the heart unstruck is the word that they use
Mm.
often. Or the sound unstruck would be better. The sound unstruck. And so I like to explain it as its symbol. And so Anahata, the symbol is essentially the crux is two triangles, kind of intersected, and one with the base longer at the top pointing downward, and the other with the base longer at the bottom pointing upward. And the sound unstruck being, although these two parts are separate, they seem separate, two separate triangles, they are interconnected. And so I've always understood that to be like that which is below us moving upwards, and that which is above us moving downwards, intersecting at the heart. And then I turn it on its side, and that which is behind us, all of our experiences, our history, our ancestry, and that which lies in front of us, also intersecting at the heart. But for most of us, this is where most of our wounding happens, whether it is a experience from a relationship, a person, somebody hurt our core, it doesn't matter how it hurt us. It's always the heart that puts up the shield and the barriers. So how do we access the healing points? So then it's surrounded by these 12-petaled lotus. Um, and so, unity and understanding and forgiveness and empathy and kindness and compassion and all of these really beautiful words that, going back to that nervous system, when we have those barriers up, we cannot access. So kind of playing with these two components to this healing that can happen on, the immune system level
Mhm.
or on the spiritual level, coming back into that alignment is exactly what we're trying to do by the how. How do we let down some of those walls?
Yeah.
And then that soul level of psyche being, these are some of the lessons we have come here to learn. And it does most often involve pain points, because how do we access any of those higher heart qualities, is what I call them. I'm not going to do it just because we're friends. Like, I don't need forgiveness if I have nothing to forgive. And I don't need to
Mhm.
remember unity if there has not been a separation. So I kind of interweave all of that into just my being. My work for sure, but my being.
Yeah. And um, can you like maybe just give an example of heart-based exercise that you share with your clients, maybe as an entry point to opening up that space and feeling more comfortable in that more vulnerable heart space?
Ooh, this is deep and hard to do. But at the same time, it's not. A lot of times I tune into, or I help clients tune into the tangible things. So, when we're talking about, let's say, esoteric or emotion or even thought, a lot of times I'll say, grab it. Can you hold it? And we can't. So thought, I'll say, is a disembodied experience sometimes. And even emotion, we can feel it, but I can't hold it. So entry points often will involve something tangible like posture or tension and ease. So when I'm tuning into, let's say, a story, an experience, a situation, I have people tune into volume, okay, intensity. Ooh, that was really loud. You're very passionate about it. So that's something I can tune into. I can tune into how fast I'm moving, my speed of speech, my shoulders, are they in my ears or not?
Mm-hmm.
So we pick a couple of spots that first bring us back into our body.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I can soften through that body, I can soften through and we do it, our default is tension. So if anyone that's listening right now, we can tune into your shoulders. Are they up in your ears or can you relax them a little bit? And then maybe your posture. We tend to be a lot of us forward thinkers. So we are shifting slightly forward, right? So alignment, can you bring that spine like directly or your shoulders directly over your hips? And then I'll tap into the stomach. Can you relax your stomach? And even for me, who instructs this all day, my default is tension and contraction and constriction. So as soon as I say that, relax your stomach, I've just naturally brought myself into alignment and I've taken a bigger breath. So now when I take that bigger breath, that's starting to slow all of the systems down.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to tap back into the story or, the context of something, but with a different undercurrent, with a different movement. And now maybe other things can start to come into our field. When we change that frequency, and this is more on that vibrational scale, um, we don't need a lot of these things in survival. I don't need compassion if I'm running from the tiger. I don't need
Right.
compassion. So when we use the body to get back into alignment, now some of those circuitries can turn back online and then we can move from that place.
Yeah. I have to say that, I found I didn't train in yoga, but I did yoga for most of my life. I found it when I was just entering college. And it was like night and day just to be able to find that place of that transition point from contraction to expansion to being in that relaxed state. And I completely fell in love with yoga.
And it's
Yeah.
amazing because a lot of people, I used to teach yin yoga specifically, and and so many people were resistant. They were like, "Oh no, not for me." And yin yoga, we're working with the connective tissue, but it involves holding postures for longer periods of time, and so we're on the ground and we're sitting here and connective tissue's purpose and function is stability and it wraps our entire body. And so, that resistance that we hold to it must be this way, and then at a certain point, that connective tissue is like, okay, I'm going to give now. Like, we don't need
Yeah.
to hold that. I'm tired. We're done,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the people that resist it, not that we need it, because we do often resist the things that we need, but when we're ready, yin is my favorite. I will sit here and just like, that's where for me, everything starts to come back online. That's where, for me, I'll have those spontaneous downloads where it's like, I will always have a journal that I can just jot some things down because I'm like, wow, the things that we can tune into when all of those distractions are out of our way, and we're
Yeah.
so afraid of that.
Yeah.
And I feel, like on the more spiritual side, I have these conversations a lot because we're talking to the nervous system being safety and danger, and we're afraid, and the things that imprint on our bodies, what we're afraid of. But sometimes when I'm helping people tune into, because I weave bottom up and top down approaches, what are we really afraid of? And it's like, well, I'm afraid of sometimes our success. A
Mhm.
lot of those things, like if I wasn't spending all of this time ruminating or in my defense system, well, what would I have to give that time to? oh, this relationship, or oh, for a lot of my clients, spiritual connection. It's like they have turned that off. They've heard those voices, they've tuned into those things, they've seen things, and they're like, oh no, that is so scary. We're afraid of our success, and I think we're afraid of how powerful we really are.
Hmm.
Not like force power, power of what we can do with these incredible bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something that we're also at risk of giving up with, merging with technology, with that movement of merging with technology. And some people will choose that. But I always say, like, we have no idea what we're capable of. We've barely tuned into it. I mean, I think some scientists are still talking about DNA as being full of junk DNA, and it's not
Hmm.
junk DNA. We just because we don't know how it works doesn't mean it's junk,
Right, right.
right?
And how we can just insert those fillers, right? And now somebody has implanted that seed thought, and I have just given life to that by subscribing. And it's interesting. I found myself the last few days specifically, like really pulled into some of the heartbreak that is going on here in the States of, and it's global. It's not just here, all of the massive flooding that's happening and these big major things. And I had to kind of put myself in check because that is the humanitarian in me, is like feeling for people, but then like pulling back from that. And so like really being intentional about how I'm spending my time if I'm on social media. And so I've kind of been like filtering out and, unfollowing and just like needing a break from. But what I have been signing on for more of is, subscribing to exactly what I was just saying is, if we believe it to be true, then we create that as reality, right? So
Yeah,
as soon as I lend to that story, we're feeding it. And
yeah,
so, I was visiting in Colorado, and we were in the parks, and they were talking about how they're trying to reintroduce certain things and take away certain things from these landscapes naturally. And how they do that is they reintroduce their food source. And how they also do that is they take away the food source, right? And I
yeah,
was just like, wow, what a perfect metaphor for what we can also do in life is stop feeding that thing, right?
yes,
We're feeding the energy of, and we're making it a reality. And all we have to do is change our intention as to like, what if we no longer subscribe to that? It doesn't mean it doesn't exist or that it's not true or that it's not even real, but we get to give power to anything and it will grow.
yes,
So that intentionality piece and so much of this,
yeah,
um, we are so powerful. And imagine us coming together intentionally to create something on a different scale. And are we afraid of that? Maybe, maybe, maybe we are.
yeah. Um, in a way, maybe we are because there's this like, mm, what if we fail, right? There's always that like, well, what if I try and I put my intention and all my energy behind it and we fail? And there it's like, well, are you failing? Or is it that it's just your expectations of what it should look like were not aligned with what the ultimate outcome was meant to be? I work a lot with astrology and also with, in anthroposophy, there's a lot of communication with our past lineage and what's coming from the future. And, there is, of course, an element of choice and free will, but there is also all of the energetics that we're surrounded with from the cosmos, from our ancestry, and from everyone who we surround ourselves with that are going to determine what our reality is and what our choices could be. And so, as you say, when you're surrounding yourself with um, things that you enjoy, things that bring you hope for the future, right? If you subscribe to, let's say I'm following a lot of things that have to do with frequency healing, sound healing, right? And I see how there is evidence of it in the past, and we are going to, and we already are seeing evidence in the present and for the future. So if I'm focusing on that, people around me that I attract to me will also be in that realm. And so this is the reality that I'm creating,
Yes.
right? And it's connecting past, future into the present moment, and the energetics of Uranus is in just now in Gemini, and Gemini is communication, is sound, and Uranus is different. So how are we going to use sound differently this time, right? Like, for instance,
Hmm.
these are the possibilities if we open up to it rather than just staying focused on what to fear.
And I love that you're bringing this into the conversation because this is that like quantum aspect, right? Or um, the experiments where everything exists at all times in all planes until we give our attention to it, and then it exists in this way,
Mhm.
right? And so, like, I think when many people are tuning into, these different realms or dimensions, um, that we oversight that I think that they're parallel, right?
Mhm.
That at any time we can shift that and tap into it. And just like that, it exists in this way. So I think
Mhm.
it can actually happen. Sometimes, again, these things come to me in the moment, but like this is coming to me here. Like it can happen that quickly for us if we just tuned into it. And again, just that not feeding of that energy that and I've lived this way just by being super in tune and empathic, that I've had to disconnect from a lot of those things on purpose. Like it's too much for me. And it's been going on since the beginning of time. Is it louder? Is it more in our face? Is it more volatile? Is it more aggressive now than ever? Sure. So it does make it a little harder to tune out. But it's like, do you ever get like those scenarios where like somebody's like having that conversation with themselves, or they're like, I'm not even engaging, and you're just like firing off? Like it'll still happen without us. So it
Mhm.
doesn't need my participation to exist. I'm just going to keep my focus here so we can start to remember that this side also exists. All things at all times exist. And we just need to turn up the volume on this side, to create more of that frequency, that sound, that vibration. And I do believe that it is happening. I do believe that there are so many more people tuning into it. But I think there's also this level, I was having this conversation with a colleague yesterday, and I said, I'm finding myself in this space of, we have the entry points, we have the crystals, and we have the more tangible entry points, the, essential oils. And I think it's beautiful. But even here, like I choose crystals because they make me happy and bring me joy, is what we were saying. But I don't need them the same way. And in fact, I need less. I'm not taking in as much information. I don't need to go to the podcasts as much. I'm not like letting someone else inform what they think or what they've found. And it's amazing what can come through in these spaces. Like, but why are we so afraid to have those silent moments, those still moments? Like so many
Mhm.
people are like, oh no, let me fill that calendar. Oh, there's blank space there. What can I put there? What are we going to do in that spot? And I'm like, what do? I watch the trees, like I'm listening to the wind, honestly, I'm watching the shapes of the clouds. And so you start to tune into just those different energies that things come to you in those spaces.
Well, I hear you absolutely, but I do also recognize that the fear of the space of the quiet time is the unworked emotions, right? The shadow that you're trying to not deal with.
Mhm, mhm.
And so but it's also an invitation for people to not be scared of that shadow, because I always say it, that's where the gold is. That's where the treasure lies. And when you can go there, you'll be rewarded.
Mhm. I say the same with the triggers, that these become these tangible points. Like somebody knows when they're triggered. And again, tuning into that volume and the intensity are words I use to help people access that a lot of that is just displaced of what I'm feeling in here.
Hmm.
So if I can say that that thing that I'm seeing or that I am resisting or repelling even in that there might just be the thing in me seeking resolve,
Hmm.
so we can go into context about it, or we can be very, I speak very broad and general sometimes because you can take that wherever that goes for you. Where is your most resistance to whom, in which situation, in which scenario are you the loudest, or where we shut down, right? Back to those systems. And is there a part of you that is seeking some resolve there, internal?
Hmm.
So those are the access points. And I agree, they're invitations. We don't need to use our energy to stuff it, resist it, hide it, push it away. Like those
Hmm.
are all movements that we are using our metabolic energy towards. Invite it in and let it be there. And what is it trying to communicate with you? And can you, when we really start to like unlock that, you might still have the same, feelings about it, but if we change the charge, that's a very different movement. Like I can still have a feeling about something, but I don't need that full force. I don't need that aggression. And that's how we can really start to alchemize a lot of this,
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. And what would you say, because this is some feedback that I got recently, what would you say to those people who are feeling like they're seeing so much injustice in the world, and they hold a lot of judgment about what they're seeing, and and they are very aware of all of the negativity, all of the, as you mentioned before, all of the aggression, etc., that's out there. And they'll say, well, that's not in me. I'm not, I'm a peace-loving person.
Mhm.
So you can't say that that's my projection,
Mhm.
right? So how do you speak to that?
Ooh, I love this because this is something coming up or has come up for me more recently as conversation and something that I had to move through a little bit because I am that. I am this peaceful and loving and calm. But what I had to sit with is also what is my relationship to anger, to injustice. And we really want to develop healthy relationship to those feelings that maybe have been suppressed. Were you allowed to express that anger? Right? Like we are meant to experience a wide range of emotions and anger is one of them. And let's say result of betrayal. But I'm but I have to keep the peace and I have to take the high road, but is that true? Like, are you allowed to express anger at things and be upset about things? And when and only when I can cultivate that healthy relationship with it and not at the person necessarily, right? We're talking about emotion being energy and energy that wants to move and transmute. So I don't want to lock myself into that as a state of being. I want to learn how to like communicate with it and then alchemize it, change it and morph it a little bit. And then can I still approach that person, that experience with something different? So I don't ever want to, not validate that these things are happening or that those experiences are not true because 1,000% through and through, yes. And right, here's that integration, here's that heart space as this bridge between two maybe opposing sides that are one. I don't want to be predominant heavy on one side. And that is even in some of these like very spiritual aspects. We want to also be connected to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And in our 3D form, in our physical body, we're going to have experiences that hurt us and that physically harm us. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but I'd be, I encourage people to lean into their own relationship with some of those things that we think we are not.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we find that middle barometer point, that balance point of both, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, because what you touched on a little bit without naming it is the concept of spiritual bypassing, right? And what we want to avoid is, like you said, pretending that it's not there.
Mhm.
We are human. We
Mhm.
are witnessing, in some cases, very ugly things. And when it does trigger something very primal in us,
Uh-huh.
then, like a rage, then
Uh-huh.
it's also okay to experience that, to feel that, and let it kind of just go through you because it's an appropriate rage, right?
Mhm.
It's like,
Exactly.
in a way, there's a lot of repressed feminine rage that we need to give voice to and
Uh-huh.
say no more,
Mhm.
right? Like we're not standing for that anymore. And
And oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
I was just going to say that this kind of segues into a little bit the rise of the feminine and your work there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that because it's so true. And this is where, that what is behind us coming through the heart again, that bigger triangle behind us coming forward. Um, Not to invalidate those experiences. And we go back and here's ancestral work and not to not validate all of those experiences. But if I want that forward motion to be expansive, how do we alchemize it in the heart to not carry that on? And so something I practice, and I don't know, this might be unconventional or not common practice for a lot of people, but in my ancestral work, um, we step into like, oh, I'm doing the work for all of these, the women that were before me and that didn't get this voice. And there's truth to that. And I also want to give back. Like I have this practice of like taking my hands and like pushing back or forward to like things that are not mine. Like what is actually mine to navigate? Because if I'm taking on my whole lineage and not that those experiences did not happen, but that's a lot to hold and carry and alchemize.
Hmm.
And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice when I'm taking on more than that is mine.
Hmm.
Right. So I think that we can find like that sweet spot that is okay. When I start to do this, that is mine, it's naturally going to be expansive. So I don't have to say, oh, and this happened to this person and this is happening here. I think and, maybe on the cellular level or the body level, let the heart do what the heart is meant to do. Heart cells are not trying to do stomach cell things. They know that they are here for the heart stuff. And when we start to put that into perspective a little bit, it does help some of this become a little bit more manageable and almost more sustainable
Hmm.
and more efficient, So I wonder, even just on the medical side, playing with that, which our bodies hold and gets stored. And, this is where things can be and create those physical imbalances and dis-ease, because we have one organ maybe doing the work of the whole body instead of that one organ doing the work of that organ.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I try to
Yeah.
relate it into different visuals for the listeners.
Yeah. Yeah. In medicine, it's by the time things have gotten to a big physical disease, some of it, of course, can be ancestral, genetic, right? And we often feel like that is set in stone and you can't do anything about it. And it feeds into a little bit like the victim mentality. And honestly, to some degree, like when you're born with a really strong genetic mutation that causes, for example, cystic fibrosis, because I've treated kids with cystic fibrosis and I know what it's like. And it's it's real, right? It's like it's and nobody can blame the child for having this disease. This is not a lifestyle disease, right? So it's in a way you're doing a lot of ancestral work through carrying this illness through your body, and your entire family is going through it with you, as the person with such a genetic disease. And at the same time, how you carry it can make a world of difference both on your health and on how your whole family is gonna, it's like it's not just the patient, 'cause of course it's like a child born with it. So it's the whole family that are working through some ancestral genetic thing. And it's kind of totally went off course of what you were talking about. It's like, oh, because it's something that I've struggled with a lot. Like how do you explain from a more spiritual level, like kids being born with these genetic problems, and I see it as an absolving of karma on the ancestral level, you know. Um,
Well, and
but
I
then,
love that.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. But what you were mentioning, to like focus on you and what you can resolve in your life. What are your issues? Because most of the time they will have anyway some ancestral component that through your resolving it within you, it's going to have a ripple effect throughout your entire family.
I've seen this, and I'm curious if I don't know so much on the medical side, but there's that quantum healing that happens again that I see happening with a client, let's say, who we might see it affect the children because of communication starts to change, or when I'm regulated, how I move in the world. But I often see it working reverse, where then a parent wants to, seek this work, or that the parent naturally starts to change their language, right? So that energetic, and again, that could be the vibrational component, when we're changing the nervous system and the subtle body, which is, I call like the nervous system's nervous system, or, the measurable auric field, or, all the names that we call it now. You feel that, and your frequency does change. And so people don't have to react the same way all the time, and they don't respond the way that they used to necessarily. So I think that can be that quantum aspect as well. But I wanted to touch on too, when you were speaking, I was hearing that epigenetic aspect, and how much do we bring like vibration and thought into, or do I lock into, what I've been taught, that this is what this means.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's the ripple of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that psyche as soul work, and all of this is soul work, that part of this, I think, too, is that we come here for these big lessons. And it does involve being the one that signs up, that says, yes, I would love to teach, I don't know, compassion or forgiveness or whatever, but that's going to look painful. Like, we don't know what it's going to look like when I sign up for it. But down the road, when we're in it on this planet, they're pain points. The big lessons, the spiritual stuff is always going to come with a pain point. And so can I change my undercurrent? And these are the things I think we need to bring into schools or young, learnings, to kind of normalize some of this. And then it's like, oh, okay, here's this big spiritual lesson that I came here for, ouch.
Yeah. Yeah, I try to frame it that way for myself too. It's like, oh, all right, good, good. I guess something good's going to come out of this eventually. It's just,
And, like, I have a girlfriend who's very much in the channeling and psychic realms and the flowers and the flower essences. And we have these conversations a lot of, why do people come in, with these very real missions of destruction and, of addiction and of those things that we might not understand. And on a lighter note, we'll like make jokes of like, well, if, we've come here many times and we've had these beautiful experiences, or, we've mastered this art of, the higher realms, and we're looking down and we're like, whoa, they're like throwing plates and like, having this wild experience. Maybe there's an element that we want to come back and experience that too. Like, what does that feel like? Like, so trying to just see it from these like multi lenses of bigger than just this moment, we might not understand it. And maybe they are more evolved and they just wanted to have a different experience this time.
Yeah, well, there's actually no place for judgment in this whole thing, right? Because you have no
We
idea.
have no idea.
No idea. Yeah, it's like, yeah. We're born with complete amnesia. We don't know who we are, who we were, and where we're going. Honestly, like, maybe we have an idea, some kind of hint, but we barely scratch the surface.
I know. And I just think of they're looking down like, oh, you have literally no idea. You're like,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. And so from my perspective, looking in like the science world, because I always loved science and medicine, like always loved to figure out how things work and understand it on the physical level. And, and then it became on the energetic level and spiritual level, like I just like to understand things. But when it was like this transition from, or this artificial separation between science and spirit, and there were so many unanswered questions. And, I always said, okay, why do we think that it doesn't exist just because we can't measure it, or we don't have like, an explanation for it based on what we do know? Like, what hubris, what ridiculousness. And yeah, as similarly, when we try to apply judgment to anything all over the, in our experience, it's just like, well, you just don't know. From our perspective, from our point that we're living, we only can have so much awareness, so much understanding.
And in that same vein, because I love that, I was always the same way. I have all of this science background. I love all of the studies. And I think that's how we are access points to people. They can, it's relatable and tangible. But more and more and more lately, in that vein of less and not knowing and not needing to know, is what I call like the reality shaping. It's like, what do I actually want it to be? So like being a, outside of the box mover, for my whole life, I was always so insecure. My hair is curly, I look different, I think different, I dress different, right? So I've always been like, oh, they're talking about me. I see people, oh, they're talking about me. And so just as an example, now if I see people, like sometimes it still comes up like, oh, they're talking about me. And then I notice it and I'm like, oh no, they're just talking about politics, or they're talking about Susie's uncle's cousins, blah, blah, blah. Like I could think of 4, 5, 7 things that they're talking about and it's not me. So what I've done is we use the same mechanism, but reversed. So I don't know if they're talking about me and they're probably not. But what do? We make that a reality. They're talking about me. And then my whole body moves differently, taking that same mechanism. And it's like, they might be talking about me, but if I don't lock into that to be true, I can create whatever reality I want. So taking that example, we can do that with anything. We literally can do that with anything. And I think that's that going back to that thing that we're so afraid of is like, well, what does that mean if I can literally change anything to be the reality that I want it to be? That's kind of scary. And that's a lot of responsibility. And that is a lot of power. But if we use it for good, imagine what we can do. If we use it for healing, if we use it for bringing the humanity to a more peaceful, happy, loving place, like, wow, same mechanisms. So, like, having the listeners hear that
Yeah,
it's the same mechanism, but we're using it in a different direction. That's power.
that's beautiful. Yeah.
I love it. I love, we could probably chat for hours.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just before closing up, I wanted to touch on the flower essences because you briefly mentioned it, and it's something that I personally have benefited from a lot in my life. And I just want to hear about your use of them as a tool and how your experience with them.
Mhm. And it's so interesting because, so much lately goes back to vibration for me. And, we talk, my colleagues and I and close friends about, how do we balance out what's happening in the world? And, do we need all of these things or can we do equally with intention, right? And that kind of goes back into prayer and the power of word and the power of vibration. But on a more tangible, maybe two steps down. um, it could be, these flower essences. So I'd like to explain flower essences, sort of how they're made. So when we talk about flower essences, a lot of people will jump to essential oils. And so these are very different than essential oils. There's no maceration, there is no like pulverizing, there's not even necessarily extraction if you don't need. We can take the flower itself, and what we do is we put it into a bowl of water. That bowl of water is usually glass, and we place that water in either sunlight or moonlight. And so the origin of this is Dr. Bach, and they were using dewdrops, right? So the dew from plants, same concept. And so what happens is when we put the flower into this water and we leave it in the sunlight, um, the water becomes this conduit for vibration. And so we extract essentially the essence of the vibration of that flower. And this I take sometimes from the work of Masaru Emoto. If the listeners don't know the hidden messages in water, that water becomes this conduit for vibration. And we are mostly water. So, going back to thoughts and intention, that can be one way, or we can take the essence of. So, why I love flowers, it's, I'll use sunflower as example. Most people know sunflower, and I'll just have people tune into, what comes up when we think of a sunflower, when you see a sunflower, and you can give me a couple of things maybe that come to your minds for the listeners, just on a whim, what comes up when you think about sunflower?
Hmm. Well, obviously the sun, summer, happiness,
Mhm.
yeah, just joy. Yeah.
Mhm. And for the listeners, your face just lit up, you smiled, it looked really vibrant. And so when we're working with flowers, we look at the structure of the flower, we look at the color of the flower, we look where it is growing, how it is growing. Um, so and the reaction that intuitively our body does. So yes, summer and sunshine and vibrant, and sunflowers grow taller than all of the other flowers, and their stalk is, thicker and bigger than most other flowers, and their, big heads look up at the sun, and you know, let's say another thing that somebody has said is they have a lot of seeds. They're very fruitful. Right.
Mm.
So all of these things is how we look at the qualities of sunflower. And so now what we do with that water, so we put the sunflower in the water, we leave it overnight or we leave it in the sun, and then we take the flower out. We have this water. We preserve it with brandy sometimes or a glycerin sometimes. And that water we put into a bottle, that becomes our mother. From that bottle, we take a couple of drops and we'll do muscle testing for this. And we put it into, let's say, a dosage bottle. And from that bottle, maybe it's 1 ounce or 2 ounces, you take only a couple of drops and we ingest that. And we put it in water. You could put it on acupressure points. And so if we're very, very micro, taking in the vibration of sunflower, we would treat the opposite. So we would treat the droopy head, the weak backbone, or the weak sense of self. Yellow is that solar plexus area. And when I was studying, we would do meditations with the plants. So we would take a couple of drops. And I remember so vividly with sunflower specifically, my whole body started lifting, my chin started lifting, like I was taking on this vibration of this flower. And so the vibrational remedies are really no harm, no foul. We can give them to pets, we can give them to pregnant women. We don't have to ingest them. We're just taking on that essence. If we don't like it, we stop taking it and we don't, carry that vibration anymore. So it's a beautiful ally, very subtle, very potent medicine. So I love to work with the flowers just as an ally to help us like access different frequency thoughts, different frequency emotions. So those become kind of stronger muscles in our body. And then, we can move
Yeah.
from that place. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love them.
Yeah. I benefited so much from them when I was going through some really challenging times in my life. And I did use Bach flowers actually. And I think that it's you mentioned, yes, everything can be done with thought and intention, but when you're in those stages of big changes, big transitions, and you're just not feeling that confidence, that ability to focus, these allies, I like to think of the plants as our allies. They help bring you there,
Yes.
and it's little by little, and it's also the intentionality of remembering to take
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
It's also part of it, because you could say, well, why do I have to take it 3 times a day? It's because you have to make that effort to take
Yes.
it 3 times a day, for instance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's working, going back to that nervous system and how I view that nervous system, they're really working with that subtle body to then make tangible that physical space.
Hmm.
So here now in my physical body, I might be able to access that caliber of thought. I can move through, I can purge out, let go. So it becomes really beautiful. Ally is the exact word that I would use to
Yeah.
help us like alchemize just that last bit, those residuals that are like,
Yeah.
ooh, we just can't get there on our own. So yes, if anybody has questions on that, I'm so
Yeah.
happy to connect more about flower. I can talk this stuff all day. I love it.
Awesome. Well, it was such a pleasure to speak with you today. I mean, like you said, we could have gone on for hours, but we do have to end this at some reasonable point. So,
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. This
yeah.
really has been so wonderful. I appreciate these conversations and I love that something I'm working with is like we were saying that frequency and the vena frequency being that so much that you just start to like be a magnet to those things, right? So the podcast and who you're bringing in and how, this is how that ripple also happens. We become the magnet to the things that we are. So, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. This has been beautiful.
Share how people can get in touch with you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure we can link in
Yeah,
show notes of
absolutely.
some
Yeah.
kind. I always say on my Instagram handle, it's at anahata_wellness. Comes up with all of the links there. My website is anahatawellness.co. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll just link it in the
Yeah.
in the show
It'll
notes.
all be in the show notes. That's right. Great.
Amazing.
Well, thank you. And thank you to all the listeners and watchers. And if you've enjoyed this content, please share it, and subscribe. It really helps to get the word out. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you.
All right.